Let's jump into it. Number 6. The moon made you insane. Imagine a doctor in the 1700s glancing at a full moon and confidently diagnosing you with temporary madness. That was an actual medical opinion. The word lunatic literally comes from luna, because people were convinced moonlight seeped into your skull and scrambled your brain like a bad Wi-Fi signal. Hospitals used to chain patients tighter during full moons, just in case the moonlight turned them into feral raccoons. The theory made a weird kind of sense at the time. The moon controls tides. Tides are water. Your body is mostly water, therefore the moon controls you. Solid logic if you ignore literally every principle of biology. In reality, your brain isn't a tiny ocean sloshing around waiting for gravitational mood swings. Modern studies have checked hospital admissions, crime rates, and ER visits against lunar cycles. And guess what? Nothing. No spike, no pattern, nothing but coincidence dressed up as destiny. But the myth refuses to die because confirmation bias is a menace. One weird night with a full moon out gets remembered forever, while 100 boring full moons vanish from memory completely. Basically, humanity looked at the sky, panicked, and blamed a rock 238,000 miles away for its own bad decisions. Number 5. Left-handed was evil. Being left-handed today is mostly an inconvenience. You smear ink across notebooks, struggle with scissors, and accidentally elbow people during dinner. A few hundred years ago, it could make people think you were working for dark supernatural forces. Across many cultures, the left hand developed an incredibly bad reputation. It became associated with bad luck, dishonesty, witches, and even literal evil. Children who naturally wrote with their left hand were often forced to switch. Teachers would tie hands behind backs or punish students until they learned to write with the correct one. The strange part is that left-handed people make up only about 10% of the population. Humans are suspicious of anything unusual. If almost everyone does something one way, the minority starts looking mysterious instead of simply different. Your brain constantly sorts people into normal and different, because recognizing patterns helped our ancestors survive. Unfortunately, that same shortcut also creates some spectacularly unfair assumptions. Science now tells us left-handedness is simply a natural variation in brain development. It doesn't predict intelligence, personality, morality, or whether you'll accidentally summon demons during math class. In other words, the only dangerous thing about being left-handed is trying to use a right-handed can opener without reading the instructions. Number 4. Tomatoes were poison. Picture refusing the single best ingredient in pizza because you were terrified it would kill you. That was Europe for almost 2 centuries. Wealthy folks ate off pewter plates loaded with lead, and acidic tomatoes leached that lead right out, causing poisoning that got blamed entirely on the innocent fruit. Nobody thought, hey, maybe it's our plates, because tomatoes were already suspicious-looking cousins of nightshade, a genuinely toxic plant family. So the logic became, shiny, red, weird-smelling, must be evil. Entire generations avoided tomatoes like they were tiny edible landmines, nicknaming them poison apples, and using them purely as garden decorations. Meanwhile, poorer folks, eating off wooden or ceramic plates with zero lead problem, were happily chowing down tomato-based dishes with no issues whatsoever, quietly living their best Italian food lives, while the aristocracy suffered from their own fancy dinnerware. It's basically the most ironic health myth in history. Rich people poisoned themselves, then blamed the vegetable, instead of the plate. Eventually, science caught up, lead exposure got identified as the actual villain, and tomatoes were reintroduced to polite society. Your brain loves a scapegoat, and tomatoes just happened to be standing there, red and defenseless, when the real culprit was literally sitting under everyone's dinner. Number 3. Bathing caused disease. You know how we're taught cleanliness prevents illness? For a solid chunk of medieval Europe, people believed the exact opposite. Bathing was considered dangerous because it opened your pores, and open pores were basically an all-you-can-eat buffet invitation for disease to crawl straight into your body. So instead of showering, people rubbed perfumed cloths on themselves, layered on more clothing, and called it a day. Queen Elizabeth I reportedly bathed once a month, whether she needed it or not, which was considered impressively hygienic for the era. The plague didn't help matters when it swept through and bathhouses became breeding grounds for infection. People connected the dots wrong and blamed water itself instead of overcrowding and poor sanitation. So an entire continent collectively decided dirt was basically armor. The irony is almost unbearable. The exact behavior meant to protect people from disease probably made outbreaks worse, since nobody was washing away the actual bacteria doing the damage. It took centuries, germ theory, and probably a lot of unfortunate smells before humanity circled back to, hey, maybe soap and water are good, actually. Your ancestors were out here fighting invisible, microscopic enemies with vibes and expensive-smelling handkerchiefs. Number 2. Babies didn't feel pain. Here's one that sounds impossible today, and yet it was believed far more recently than you'd expect. For a surprisingly long time, many doctors thought newborn babies couldn't truly feel pain the way adults do. Some believed their nervous systems weren't fully developed, while others assumed infants simply wouldn't remember painful experiences, so it didn't really matter. That belief led to surgeries being performed with little or even no proper pain relief. Imagine assuming someone doesn't suffer simply because they can't explain it. The scary part is that babies couldn't argue back. They cried, of course, but crying was often dismissed as a simple reflex rather than evidence of genuine pain. As medical research improved, scientists discovered the opposite was true. Babies absolutely experience pain, and in some cases they may even be more sensitive because their pain control systems are still developing. Their inability to describe it doesn't make it any less real. It's a reminder that silence, or in this case, the inability to communicate, doesn't equal comfort. Your brain has a dangerous habit of assuming that if someone can't explain their experience, they aren't really having one. Reality rarely agrees. Humanity didn't suddenly invent baby pain, we just finally started listening to the evidence instead of our assumptions. Number 1. Bloodletting cured everything. Imagine walking into a doctor's office with a headache and walking out with fewer pints of blood than you arrived with. For roughly 2,000 years, that was actual, respected medicine. The theory of 4 humors claimed your body ran on blood, phlegm, and 2 kinds of bile, and literally any illness, fever, fatigue, sadness. A stubbed toe probably meant your humors were out of balance. The solution? Drain some blood and hope for the best. Doctors used leeches, blades, and specially designed bleeding bowls, treating blood loss like hitting the reset button on a malfunctioning video game console. George Washington's own doctors bled him repeatedly while he was dying of a throat infection, removing nearly half his blood supply in a single day, which almost certainly sped up his death rather than preventing it. The horrifying irony is that bloodletting occasionally seemed to work purely because fevers naturally break on their own and patients sometimes recovered despite the treatment, not because of it. Nobody questioned it for centuries because it was expensive, official-looking, and performed with serious medical confidence. Basically, humanity spent 2 millennia treating a garden hose like a diagnostic tool and called it healthcare. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.